Every NFL fan everywhere is always going to talk about how their team can win a Super Bowl. It's like the number one thing you talk about when it comes to your team. Unless you're the Browns?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
They're like, we ain't winning.
Well,
ain't
yeah.
no way we gonna win.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, like, in general, there's always a conversation about, like, how do you put the pieces of the puzzle together? But I do notice that sometimes when you have a team that looks very different, whether they're winning or losing, but most especially if they're losing and look different than the successful version of your team did in the past, that conversation becomes even more prominent. So what I'm saying is the question that I'm going to be asking all of us, and I'll answer and you'll answer and listeners will answer, is what's a winning formula look like for the Seahawks? Like, how do you get to a Super Bowl? What's it look like? 866-979-3776 is the Mac and Jack's text line. And Bump, I ask this because I was seeing, this is a text I got, but I was seeing a lot of this on Twitter. And this is what it says. We won a Super Bowl in 2013 with a group of mid receivers. The running game is more important than the passing game if the true goal is winning another trophy. That's kind of reflective of a lot of the sentiment that I was seeing, that basically some people, some fans are like, I don't like how the Seahawks are built. I don't think this is how you win. I don't want to pay DK. I don't really want to pay Geno. Invest more in that offensive line. And they find themselves looking at a little bit of 2005 when they lost in the Super Bowl, but obviously got to one. And then obviously at 2013 when they won, to see if there's a secret formula that the Seahawks in their mind should be emulating. What do you make of that?
Well, let me tell you this. In 2005, the leading passer in the game had a whopping 4,100 yards, 26 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions. That was the leading passer in the game in 2005. That just lets you know what the game was like then. There were more tight ends. There were more fullbacks. The game was more compact. It was different. Offense manipulates what the game looks like. It manipulates what the defense has to do. And who manipulates the offense? The offensive coordinator, the minds. So imagine in 2005, I would assume there's some 40-something-year-old calling offense who was born in the 60s, who was raised in the 70s and 80s, who watched a different brand of football. The game is always changing. So you look at the way that the Hawks won back then, back in the day in 2005. That made sense for that era, for sure. Made sense. Matt Hasselbeck threw for 24 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Sounds like Geno, right? You were able to win that way because that's just the way that's the personnel that you had, right? So now the game has evolved, and we're let's go to 2015, right? Yeah. We won a Super Bowl.
Well, I was going to say they're even looking at 2013. Okay. So in 2005, obviously running with an offense, and then they're 13. Kind of applying it.
So 13. You know why you won? You had one of the best defenses in all the land. You have one of the best defenses in all the land, right? So you go from, in 2005, having one of the best O-lines that man has ever seen. Okay, yeah, the game allows you to play the game like that. Then you go to 2013-14, and you have the best defense in the world. You look at this team right now, there's nothing that they're great at. It's something they're good at. They can throw the football, but we know that the more you throw the football, the more chances you have for interceptions and to turn the football over. You must be able to run the ball. So I understand them looking at it and say, we won with mid receivers. Doug Baldwin, I would never call Doug Baldwin mid. Not on air, not to his face. Doug Baldwin was a Pro Bowler, one of the best receivers of his era, for sure. But you also had one of the greatest defenses of all time that made up for a lot of mistakes or a lot of shortcomings that your team had as a whole. This team has to be great at something. They're good at something right now. They're decent at something right now, which is throwing the football across the yard. But the way the game is played today, you need a DK. You need a Devontae. You need a Justin Jefferson. You need a Puka. You need a Cooper Kupp. You need a receiver. A receiver is not going to be the thing that makes you win a championship, but it's going to contribute to the explosive plays and how the game is played today. You go ahead and switch it up if you want to, if you're John Schneider, and say, okay, I'm going to bring it back to old school football. I'm going to compact the game and do it that way. Okay, we'll see if it works. You know what? I feel like there might be a moment in football where you kind of go back to that because all you're doing is trying to get mismatches on defense. So if you do pack it in constantly and run the rock, you force the defense to change it up. The Detroit Lions are already doing that in a sense, but they can pack it up and they can spread it out. Just the game is different, you know, so it's always hard to compare errors, man, because
it is.
The coaching was different, the players were different, the schemes were different.
Well, and it wasn't as simple as, while John Schneider and Pete Carroll made it look simple, it wasn't as simple as going out and finding those players. So, like, to your point, the Seahawks didn't have the number one ranked. They spent on the offensive line, for sure, but they didn't have the number one ranked offensive line when they won Super Bowl 48. They had, I would say, like just outside the top 10. So the best offensive line that they had under Pete Carroll ever was that 2013 team, but it wasn't an elite offensive line. Again, to your point, exactly. They won because they had shut down corners, shut down safeties, and a really good, really deep defensive front seven with really good players. With KJ, and we didn't know KJ was great yet. With Bobby, we didn't know Bobby was a future Hall of Famer yet. He was only a second-year player. Like, we didn't know these things yet.
Yeah.
Also, important to know, all of those guys were on rookie deals.
Yep.
All of those guys, with the exception of guys like Michael Bennett or Cliff Averill or free agents that you brought in, all of those guys, including key players on offense, with the exception of obviously a couple offensive linemen and Marshawn Lynch, all of those guys were rookies on rookie deals. So you had one of the youngest Super Bowl teams ever, and you had a lot of talent all over the place. You just didn't realize how good it was. And one thing that I think you realize if you're John Schneider today is that you have a lot of talent at wide receiver. Yeah, you're going to have to pay DK. That's a big decision that you're going to have to make. And let's say he's not comfortable with it. Are you sure that you can get a really high draft pick and take an offensive lineman and find a guard and solve that? If so, great. This offensive line needs to improve.
DK,
you fundamentally need to improve in the trenches.
He's not going to get you a first-round pick.
Then is it worth it to you?
He's not going to get your first-round pick.
That's what I'm saying. Like, follow where your elite talent is. I don't think that the Vikings, if they were to build their perfect team, would have the single best player on their team be a wide receiver, but he is.
This DK trade, keep, whatever, is to be continued. It's not going to be determined right now. 3 weeks ago, DK had back-to-back 100-yard games. You feel different about him. 3 weeks later, he's got 2 games where he fumbled, and he's blown up on the sideline. People are ready to get rid of him. What are the next 3 weeks going to look like? No decisions about DK will be and should be made right now. That's towards the end of the year. And then you got to think about how you're building your team. You got a first-round pick on the D-line. Last year, you got a first-round pick in the secondary. I think defensively, you're moving in the right direction. You got to add a couple pieces. That's why McDonald needs more than 6 games to try to figure this whole thing out.